The psoas, because of its insertions on the lumbar spine, also has profound implications on the position of the lumbar spine, as well as movements about the lumbar spine. So is it a flexor or is it an extensor? The reality of the situation is that it's probably a little bit of both, depending on where you are on the lumbar spine. It seems that the superior portion of the psoas, so higher up towards T12 into the the upper lumbar vertebrae, seem to have an extension effect on the lumbar spine, whereas the lower section of the psoas has a flexion moment on the lumbar spine. Thomas Myers, in one of his articles, says that it could be considered, the psoas that is, as 6 completely different muscles originating at the lesser trochanter and inserting at each and every individual vertebrae from T12 down to L5. The lumbar spine can also be stabilized by psoas activity. It's been shown that with standing lifting tasks, the psoas activates at about 15% of maximum voluntary contraction. It can comprise the movement of compression of the lumbar spine. So when it contracts, it squeezes down the lumbar spine, effectively providing stability. This same stability can also facilitate breathing. If you look at the structure of the diaphragm, it has attachments on the intercostal surfaces, but also on the crural diaphragm, which would be attaching at the L1, 2, and 3. So by providing an opposite direction of forces with the diaphragm, it provides a stable base for the crural portion of the diaphragm to contract and help the diaphragm push down the viscera. Finally, the psoas can definitely participate in lateral flexion of the spine. This has a couple of implications. Number one is plain old lateral flexion. Now, from a dysfunction standpoint, it can also lead to a rotoscoliosis. So, hyperactivity of the psoas on one side forces the vertebrae to rotate away. So, a right side hypertonic psoas would create left rotation of the lumbar vertebrae and all the vertebrae that follow above it. To compensate for that, higher up, they're going to bring the rib cage back towards the right, and you're going to have slight scoliosis and some rotation component, hence rotoscoliosis. The EMG activity has shown also that unilateral weight carrying, so if you were to carry a dumbbell in your right hand, for example, it would lead to very high activity of the opposite side psoas, the contralateral psoas. The argument can also be raised, is the psoas a true lateral flexor, or is it an anti-lateral flexor? Meaning to say that in the case of holding that weight in your right hand, is it there to prevent your spine from buckling towards the weight, or is it legitimately there to produce lateral flexion? Obviously, it's capable of doing both. So what does it do to lumbar movement? Is it a flexor? Somewhat. The inferior fibers, the inferior insertion points on the lumbar vertebrae, can cause flexion moments on the spine. How about as an extensor? Again, like flexors, somewhat. The superior parts are going to be extensors of the lumbar spine. Does it play a role in lumbar stability? Absolutely. The compression caused by the psoas contraction can help stabilize the lumbar spine. Does it play a role in breathing? This, too, is almost unquestionable. How big of a role, however, is unknown, unquantified in the current literature. But I believe it can. What about lateral flexion? It can definitely cause lateral flexion. It can also prevent lateral flexion, depending on who you speak to. So there are several other considerations, like posture, number one. The position of the psoas is anterior to the head arms trunk center of mass. What that means then is activation of the psoas can prevent hyperextension of the hips and hyperextension of the upper body, thus helping maintain posture. The most recent research on this, however, has shown that it's only about 2% of maximal voluntary contraction in maintaining posture. The iliacus seems to activate significantly more. The psoas, given its insertion on the T12 vertebrae and down into the lesser trochanter, make it the highest muscle that connects the upper and lower body. Some can even say that running begins at the lumbar spine. Sergei Grakovetsky's spinal engine is based almost solely on this theory that the lumbar spine begins there. Running begins at the lumbar spine. So what do we now know? We now know unquestionably that the psoas participates in hip flexion, lumbar extension, as well as compression and lateral flexion. It has a minimal effect on hip rotation, though it's slightly biased towards external rotation. It plays a small postural role, and it might be the start of locomotion, and it probably can impact breathing. It's no question then that the one muscle, one function is probably a short-sighted